Chapter 136, 7th Year, Mind Games. Everyone was thrilled to see Marlene, of course. Sirius ushered her through the fat lady portrait as fast as he could, and practically trumpeted her arrival to the whole common room, as though he had conjured her from thin air. Lily and James rushed over, hugging her and taking her bag and cloak, and leading her to the couch by the fireplace, where Mary hugged her so fiercely Marlene almost squeaked. "We've missed you!" Mary exclaimed, finally letting her friend go. I can see that," Marlene gasped, pink-cheeked. "Have you all been bored without me?" Remus hung back a little. He and Marlene didn't hug much anyway, so he didn't think it would be noticed. He watched her warily and chose to sit in the armchair furthest away from her, trying not to draw attention to himself. Christopher had slipped away at some point too, maybe up to his dorm. In the back of his mind, Remus hoped Chris wasn't too angry with him, but filed that away for another time. He had too much to worry about with Marlene's return. "How's Danny?" Mary was asking now, lowering her voice. He's recovering," Marlene nodded, her eyes serious. "He's at home now. Mum's driving him crazy as usual. He won't be going back to the cannons." She swallowed and looked down at her hands. "It's a bloody disgrace!" James banged his fist on the arm of the couch. "If I was their manager, He's too badly injured anyway." Marlene shook her head, wiping quickly under her eyes. "He'd have been off for the rest of the season either way. It'll be months before he's back on the broom, so just as well." "Still bollocks," James muttered. "Yeah, well," Marlene looked up stonily. "Can hardly blame them. I know I would have. Anyway, it's not worth thinking about." Remus felt sick with tension. Everyone else sitting in the group knew what he was. Everyone except Marlene. The guilt he had been successfully avoiding for a week came crashing back over him like a cold shower. It had been his responsibility to warn everyone of the attack. He had told Dumbledore, but it hadn't been enough. He'd failed, and now the evidence of his failure was sitting right in front of him, her face thin and her eyes dark with worry. Marlene cleared her throat and flashed them all a brave smile. "I'm going to talk to Madame Pomfrey as soon as I can, see if she recommends anything. The healers at St. Mungo's were useless, more concerned with keeping him quarantined than actually helping him. Hardly anyone could answer the questions I had about transformation, or aftercare, or pain relief. It was like they'd rather I just stop talking about him, like they wanted to pretend he wasn't there." Her voice was getting higher and thinner as she said this, tears threatening to choke her. She cleared her throat again. I know what he is, don't get me wrong, I know what he's become, but he's still my brother, for fuck's sake." "Of course he is," Mary said, squeezing Marlene's hand. She gave Remus a look, and he looked at his feet. No way, absolutely not. No one else was speaking, but they all had the same look on their faces. "Are they thinking about me?" Remus wondered queasily. "Do they blame me? Are they wondering what I'm capable of?" "Anyway," Marlene shook her head again. What's been going on here? Is that your cat, Lily?" "Valentine's Day present," Lily smiled, stroking the purring bundle in her lap. "His name's Hieronymus." "Catchy," Marlene sniffed, smiling. "Nice one, Potter, you big softy." "You're still on the team, right?" James asked, leaning forward. "My star beater." "Of course," she rolled her eyes. "I'm assuming that training times haven't changed." "First thing tomorrow morning," James grinned. "And we're planning this huge..." Peter started eagerly, but was cut off. "Oi, McKinnon!" They all turned round to see Yasmin standing behind the couch, hands on her hips and grinning widely. She'd obviously been getting ready for bed. Her hair was piled messily on top of her head, and she was wearing her oversized Holly Harpies shirt and a baggy pair of men's pyjama bottoms. "All right, Patel," Marlene answered. Remus couldn't see her face, but he knew she was smiling. She twisted round on the couch and got up on her knees, and the girls hugged tightly. You could do that, Remus realised, if you were girls. No one thought it was weird. He wondered if Sirius was thinking the same thing. He hoped not. That pretty much put an end to any more werewolf talk, which was a relief. Remus just hoped he could avoid it later, when it was just him and Sirius. He was sure to want to know how Remus felt, and what his thoughts were. And while yes, okay, Remus did understand that communication was important and blah blah blah, did that really mean they had to discuss every painful thing in minute detail? For God's sake, he was already getting agitated about it, and it hadn't even happened. He cracked his neck, then his shoulders, willing himself to loosen up. He was still a bit wound up from that kiss out in the corridor, he realised. He wasn't sure whether or not Sirius had meant it that way, or if it was just all show for Christopher. But it had stirred something in Remus, and now felt like unfinished business. He shifted in his seat and tried to ignore that too. Mary had tactfully moved to the other end of the couch, and was now casually filing her nails and chatting to Lily, who was teasing her kitten with a quill. Yaz climbed over the back of the sofa to take her place, and she and Marlene had their heads together, speaking very quickly and very quietly. Remus caught the muggy scent of the muffliato spell, which was odder from the outside than the inside, as if their very words were blurred out somehow. They were sitting so close to each other that their thighs touched, Yaz's arms slung around the back of the couch, just behind Marlene's head, in a way that would have raised eyebrows, even if only one of them was a boy. James and Sirius were in deep conversation about the upcoming Quidditch match against Ravenclaw, Peter eagerly interjecting every now and then with his own tactical insights. Remus pulled his book out and tried to read, but it was no good. He couldn't concentrate with so many people chatting. The last postcard from Grant was tucked into the dust jacket of Maurice, and he read it again. This time the photo on the front was of 3 bikini-clad girls frolicking in the sea. Even Sirius had found that one funny. There wasn't much on the back. Grant was a man of few words when it came to written correspondence. Working hard, having fun. Hope you're well. Love. That word again. Obviously Grant could say it, or write it. He couldn't spell Remus's surname the same way twice, but love was no big deal. Ugh. Only half an hour ago, Remus had been almost completely free from worry, cocooned by his friends and Sirius, and the idiotic notion that everything would be okay if they could just come up with a really good prank. But the shade had fallen now, and no matter where he looked, all Remus could see was trouble and his own failings. Frustrated, he slammed his book closed on the postcard, a little too hard. Everyone looked up. "All right there, Moony?" Lily asked gently. "Fine, sorry." Remus nodded. He reached into his pockets for a cigarette, pulling out his matchbox quickly. "Not in the common room, please!" Lily switched to head girl mode as quick as a flash. Right, sorry." He clumsily clambered up to his feet, fag purse between his lips. "I'll go upstairs." "We're going to bed too," Marlene said, then blushed and stammered quickly. I mean upstairs to sleep, we've got early practice." Yaz was barely able to keep a straight face as she waved goodbye to them all before hurrying up the stairs after her girlfriend. Mary and Remus shared a knowing look, but James and Lily seemed blissfully ignorant. "Night," Remus nodded to everyone, heaving his bag onto his shoulder and heading up the opposite flight of stairs to the boys' dormitories. It was a mistake. Alone, he had nothing to distract him from his own judgments, and they were harsh. Quite right too, in Remus's opinion. If the McKinnon family could not forget the repercussions of his failure to act, then why should he have any respite? And those were just the people he knew he'd let down. There were families up and down the country now facing full moons for the first time. It was a good thing his father was dead and his mother had washed her hands of him. At least he couldn't cause them any more pain. He sat on the window ledge, letting the cold air wash over him, smoking and thinking and scolding himself until he thought he might as well just fling himself out of it. But that was just a passing fancy. Remus was too much of a coward to do what ought to be done. This much he knew. Still, he felt a strong urge to do something drastic, something violent. The wolf inside would have liked a good long run. But it would soon be past curfew. There was a bit of dope in his sock drawer, but that would only make him more gloomy. Someone was hiding a bottle of fire whiskey. He could smell it. But that was probably in preparation for his own upcoming birthday, and he couldn't spoil that for his friends. Maybe put on a record and flail around a bit, but he'd never been much for dancing, and his hip was bothering him. Sirius's footfall on the stairs disrupted his thoughts. Remus licked his lips, remembering that kiss from earlier. There was always that, the ultimate distraction. Decision made, he stubbed out the cigarette and got up, striding purposefully across the room. He reached the door just as Sirius pushed it open. Best not even to give him a chance. "Watcha, Mooney? Just came up to see if you—" He shut him up with a fierce kiss, crushing their lips together, pulling him at the hips so that they were pressed hard against each other. "Oh, okay," Sirius gasped when he finally wrenched himself free. He kicked the door shut behind himself as Remus dragged him to the bed. It was good, really, really good. Remus's frustrated urgency was met with answering eagerness from Sirius as they tore against each other, out of sync in the best way possible. Losing yourself in drink or drugs was nothing compared to losing yourself in Sirius Black. They'd been at this long enough now to know the edges of each other's limits, and know just how far they could push them. "Fuck," Sirius groaned when it was all over, and the windows were steamy, and the waxing moon had risen outside. Remus reached for his fags once more, still buzzing, his hot skin humming. "Fuck," Sirius said again, on his back, staring up. Beautiful mess. "What brought that on?" "Just you," Remus replied, exhaling smoke. "Just wanted it. I'm not complaining." Remus settled back, smoking quietly. This was good. This was better anyway, than anything else he could be doing. He was still restless though, a bit more tired, but fidgety and unsettled. He could go again. He could go all night, if it would shut his brain up. That made him glance at the door. They hadn't shut the curtains, and by some miracle got away with it. "Where are the others?" Sirius's eyes had drifted shut, but he opened them valiantly. Peter's 3 rounds into a chess game with some second year, who's obviously some sort of evil mastermind. Mary went to bed, and Prongs and the missus have gone to the prefect's bathroom. They thought they were being subtle." He chuckled lightly under his breath. "I'm going to brush my teeth," Remus said, getting up. In the bathroom, everything came flooding back. He couldn't meet his own eyes in the mirror. When he came back out, Sirius had woken up a bit and was sitting on the bed. He smiled at Remus. "Hey, I just wanted to check you're okay about Marlene and everything." "Fine," Remus nodded casually, climbing back in, drawing the curtains closed as he did. "It's good to have her back." I hope you're not worried about—" "Do we have to talk about that?" Remus crawled towards him, straddling his lap. He began kissing Sirius's neck, rocking into him slowly. "Blimey, again?" Sirius sounded surprised, but not exactly unhappy about it. Remus replied, taking his wrists and holding them tight. Okay, but if you are worried—" "Oh, shut up, Black," Remus growled, pulling him back and meeting his eye. Sirius did, biting his lip. Remus smiled. "Much better. No more talking tonight." It was a cruel trick, really, exploiting Sirius's particular proclivity for following direct instructions. But it worked, and Remus got his piece, at least that night. The next day was tougher, but lessons and library time became a comfortable barrier between them once again, not to mention the general rabble of friends who accompanied them pretty much everywhere. A wiser, braver man might have used the time to look into himself, to address the feelings of guilt and shame and self-disgust, and maybe make some changes for the better. Remus preferred pretending everything was fine. And, for a little while anyway, it seemed that Sirius was going to let him. They were still together most of the time, and it wasn't as if they were arguing. If Sirius wondered why Remus's libido rocketed any time they started to have a private conversation, he didn't say anything. In the end, he took a different tact. The weekend before the upcoming full moon, They were walking back to school from Hogsmeade, and Remus had to slow down because of his stupid hip yet again. Sirius and James were chatting ahead, but Christopher hung back to keep Remus company. They had been to the 3 broomsticks, but the whole big group of them, and Christopher was always too shy to talk much in that sort of situation, so he was taking his chances now. "I'm glad you liked the book," he said, hands in his pockets as he walked. "Wasn't it a nice ending?" "Yeah, great." Remus puffed, rubbing his hip to try and get it going. "Maurice, the character, reminded me a bit of you." "What?" "Nah." He was starting to sweat with exertion, despite the cold February air. He wiped his forehead, squinting uphill. Sirius and James were striding ahead, laughing about something together. Christopher followed his eyeline. He pressed his lips together. "Are you and he—" He couldn't find the words, and Remus knew what it was like, so he just gave a straight answer. No need to be coy. "Yeah, we are." "Oh." Christopher sounded deflated, as if he had still thought it was all a joke at his expense. "What's that like, then?" "I dunno. Good. Great." "I wish—" He sounded so sad. He never finished the sentence. After a long time, and more struggling to keep up, Remus touched his shoulder gently. "There's someone for everyone, Chris." "Maybe." "Oi, Mooney! Come on!" Sirius was yelling. They were almost at school now. Sirius had stopped under the stone arch gateway to wait. "See you later, okay, Remus?" Christopher muttered, hurrying off at a funny little jog. Remus ploughed on, finally reaching the school gate. His hip was screaming at him now, the joints burning, pain shooting up and down his leg. He nodded at Sirius by way of greeting, but too out of breath to speak. He leaned against the stone with one arm, hoping Sirius wouldn't mind waiting a bit, while he pulled himself together. "Sorry," he panted finally. "I hate that fucking hill." "Are you okay?" Sirius asked, giving him a funny look. "Sorry, didn't mean to leave you behind." "It's fine," Remus replied. "You know me, just a bit wonky." He straightened up and winced, and rubbed his side again. "Is it your hip?" Sirius had his hands on his hips now, and was giving him an up and down sort of look that was rather like Madame Pomfrey after a bad full moon. "Yeah," Remus shrugged. "It's always been a bit funny." "When you say a bit funny, do you mean that you're in pain?" "It's just sore," Remus said, indignant. So pain then." Sirius raised an eyebrow. Remus hated that superior look. "How long has it been hurting?" "Oh, I dunno." Remus threw his hands up, exasperated. What was the point of this? "Since I was 13. "Are you joking?" "It's just off and on." "What does Madame Pomfrey say?" "Oh, for God's sake, I don't whinge to her about this sort of crap." Remus was aware that his voice was getting louder. A few third years walking past turned and looked at him, before running away giggling. "You're being ridiculous." Sirius folded his arms and tossed his hair. "She's a nurse. She's supposed to make you feel better. What would you do if I told you I'd been in pain for 5 years? "It's not the same." "What are you on about?" "You're not a fucking werewolf." He stopped himself just in time. They both looked around themselves furtively, checking no one was listening. Remus scolded himself. It had been a very long time since he'd let anyone get the better of his temper. Sirius leaned forward, glaring at him. "You don't deserve to suffer, for fuck's sake," he muttered. That hurt. He didn't know why, but it struck Remus so sharply it knocked the breath out of him, and his eyes pricked. He straightened up, careful to remain expressionless this time. He jutted his chin out at Sirius, meeting his glare. "I'm not talking about this anymore. Come on, we'll miss dinner," and began to stride ahead, biting back against the stabbing in his side. Chapter 137, 7th Year, Remus the Martyr. Wednesday, the 22nd of February, 1978. The stalemate between Remus and Sirius lasted for the rest of the weekend. Sunday was the Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw Quidditch game, so they got away with not speaking much. They both sat together in the stands, cheering when it was appropriate and booing any time the Ravenclaws scored. "And that's another 10 points to Gryffindor," the commentator called out through the megaphone. "An overwhelming 60 points now scored by team captain James Potter. No surprises there. Fans are starting to wonder what will become of their mighty Lions next year when they don't have their golden boy to depend on. Ooh, mind that bludger, Sims. Nicely done. Though I must say, I'd have veered left, but I suppose not everyone is chosen for their dexterity. Sometimes it's just about giving everyone a chance, regardless of ability." "Who let Lockhart do the commentary?" Sirius grumbled. "Stupid Pratt doesn't even know anything about Quidditch." "He told me he was lined up to play for Puddlemere," Peter said, "and the only reason he never played for Ravenclaw was that his coach said he shouldn't squander his gift in school games." "You're so gullible, Pete," Remus nudged him. "I know more about Quidditch than that twat." "Yeah, and Moony knows as much about Quidditch as you know about judging character," Sirius added, his voice unnecessarily sharp. Remus coloured. Fine, if Sirius wanted to be passive-aggressive. "Well, Padfoot," he replied coolly, "if you want to do it so much, go and ask McGonagall. I think you'd be perfect for the job." "You what?" Sirius gaped at him. Remus raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah, you're the only person in this school who chats more shit than Lockhart does." Mary and Lily burst into giggles, covering their mouth. Sirius scowled. "Up yours," he muttered. The game ended with 280 points to Gryffindor, but Sirius wasn't cheering. Quidditch matches generally took up most of the day, from an early breakfast listening to James's pep talks to the inevitable after-party in the common room. Sirius stayed up late, so nobody noticed that they didn't go to bed together. By Monday, they were on slightly more civil terms, or at least, neither of them wanted any of their friends to know they'd been fighting. Remus immersed himself in his Newt revision. If he wasn't alone in the library, he was extending his study group sessions to run an hour longer than usual, each night. It was the week of the full moon, and he was utterly exhausted, but at least it made getting to sleep easier. And he had to avoid Marlene too, of course. He deliberately skipped going to Madame Pomfrey's Tuesday night healing lessons, just in case the subject of werewolves reared its ugly head again. Marlene was the sort of girl who would derail an entire lesson if she thought injustice was being done somewhere. To Remus's surprise, Gilderoy Lockhart, the smarmy Ravenclaw commentator, made a guest appearance in his Wednesday revision group. Lockhart was in the year below and hadn't crossed the Marauders' radar much so far. He was a bit camp and annoying, prone to laughing too loudly in the dining hall, but that was all Remus knew about him. He sidled up to Remus, his hair in ridiculous blonde bouffant curls. He stank of aftershave too. "Love this idea," he gushed. "Helping other students to achieve? Really great." Yeah, suppose," Remus replied, shuffling his papers. "Thought I'd lend a hand," Lockhart grinned. "I'm rather a whiz myself, you know. Charms, transfiguration, potions, you name it." Great, cheers," Remus nodded. I'd said I'd go through anti-giant legislation with the third years today, but have a chat with Chris." He moved away quickly, leaving Christopher to deal with it. Wednesday was also the second official meeting of the prank planning group, so Remus and Chris stayed back in the charms room after the study group. Chris had a vaguely dazed expression as they leaned against Flitwick's desk, waiting. "Ugh, sorry about that," Remus offered, lighting up a cigarette as Lockhart swanned out. "I don't know how to deal with him." It's fine. He's in half of my classes, so I'm used to it," Chris replied, still looking a bit disturbed. "What did he want?" "It took a while to figure out," Christopher frowned. "He kept telling me how good he is at everything, but I think he wanted help with charms." Remus snorted disdainfully. The prank planning session was shorter than the week before. It turned out that no one had any decent ideas yet. The fourth-year Ravenclaws had uncovered some frankly terrifying curses, which they were all eager to share. But Lily stepped in, reiterating the rule that nobody ought to get hurt. They split up again for the journey back to their common rooms, and Remus was faced with a choice between Marlene and Yaz, or Sirius and Mary. In the end, he decided it was better the devil he knew, and chose Sirius and Mary. She did most of the talking, which was a relief, and the only awkward moment came when the boys were back in their dormitory. Remus went over to his own bed, pulling back the duvet. "You're sleeping there, then?" Sirius asked, out of the blue. Remus frowned, turning to look at him. He hadn't thought it was up for debate. They were barely speaking to each other. Why on earth would they sleep together? And why on earth did Sirius want to call attention to it in front of the others? "Yeah," he nodded, turning back. "Full moon tomorrow. Thought we should all get as much sleep as possible." "Yeah, fair enough," Sirius replied. Remus climbed in and drew his curtain shut, without another word. "Is everything okay?" James whispered, very loudly. Sirius grunted a response, and that was that. Thursday the 23rd of February, 1978. Remus was more on edge than usual on the day of the full moon. He'd slept badly anyway, thinking of the McKinnons and Sirius, and wondering how he was ever going to fix any of it. At breakfast, it looked as though Marlene had had a difficult night too. Her eyes were rimmed red, and her hair was messier than usual. Yaz and Mary sat either side of her, vying to be the one who comforted her the most. "I just can't stop thinking about him." Marlene shook her head, staring into her bowl of cornflakes. "I've read so many books and accounts, and they all say it hurts a lot." Remus stopped eating his own breakfast and sipped his tea instead, trying to hide his distress. "I've read that too," Sirius said. "But I'm sure that as long as Danny asks for the help he needs, then he'll be fine." Remus tried to ignore this, seething quietly under his collar. "Mum's had to take him to the ministry," Marlene continued miserably. "They all have cells there, apparently. We asked if there would be any healers present, but no one would tell me anything." "I'm sure it's the best place." Yaz squeezed her arm gently. Nobody agreed with her. Mary pursed her lips. "He doesn't deserve this." Marlene burst into tears. "He doesn't deserve being locked up alone. He's my lovely brother, not some animal." The nausea of guilt threatened to overwhelm Remus, and he left as soon as he could. The rest of the day he could barely concentrate on his lessons. Perverse as it was, ever since the Marauders had become animaguses, he'd sort of looked forward to the full moons at Hogwarts. It'd been a while since he'd dreaded one quite this much. When he arrived at Madame Pomfrey's office in the afternoon, he found her frowning her way through a pile of letters. He'd never seen her doing paperwork before. "Oh, hello, dear." She smiled at him tiredly. "Shall we get going?" He nodded and waited patiently for her to put on her cloak. She saw him staring at the letters. "They're from ex-pupils mostly," she explained. "Ones who were affected by the attacks. Some of them have family members facing their first full moon, and they want to know if I know anything helpful." "Oh." "I've been able to pass on a bit about aftercare, but you and I know how little information there is," she continued as they walked out. Remus remained mute. "I've had poor Miss McKinnon in here every day almost. She's a friend of yours, isn't she?" "Yeah." Remus's voice cracked slightly. Madame Pomfrey patted his arm softly. "It must be very hard for you, my dear." "It's fine. You know you can always talk to me if you need." "Thanks." He could hear Sirius's voice in the back of his head taunting him. "I told you so." But Sirius was wrong. Physical pain was the very least of Remus's problems, and something he was willing to bear if he had to. It reminded him what he owed. Despite his apprehension, the full moon was a relief. Remus didn't even cry out from the pain of the transformation. He just let it consume him. As ashamed as it made him, it was good to become something else for a few hours, to relinquish control. The wolf was still on good terms with Padfoot, at least, and they could play and run and hunt without any messy human problems getting in the way. But it wasn't to last. Friday the 24th of February, 1978. The routine was standard by now. Remus transformed back, the others checked he was okay, then left. Madame Pomfrey came to collect him. He spent the morning under a sleeping draught, woke up in time for lunch, then headed back to his own bed in the afternoon. More recently, Sirius had been coming to collect him from the infirmary, if his timetable allowed for it. And actually, even when his timetable didn't allow for it, Sirius took any excuse to bunk off. Of course, given the way Remus had been acting, he didn't expect Sirius to come that day. But Sirius was always full of surprises. "Brought you a frog," he said, waiting patiently as Remus finished tying his laces. He handed over a chocolate frog box, which Remus accepted. His temper had cooled quite a bit. Perhaps a good long sleep had been all he needed. "Thanks." "Can we be okay again?" Sirius asked, sounding genuinely sorry. "Can we both just admit that we said some stupid stuff, but it's over now?" Remus looked at him for a long time, letting him stew for a little bit, then smiled. "Yeah, go on then." They walked back to the tower quite happily, though Remus was pushing himself a bit harder than normal, trying not to limp or show any trace of discomfort. "Is Marlene okay?" Remus asked, as they neared the common room. "Yeah, I think so," Sirius nodded. "She got a letter from her mum this morning, saying Danny's okay. She cried a bit, but she's less of a state now." "Good. That's good." They pushed through the portrait hole and walked through the common room. "I think I'll go straight to bed for a bit," Remus said, making for the dorm. "Is that okay?" "Of course," Sirius nodded, over-polite, as they headed up yet another flight of stairs. Remus was seriously struggling now, but he'd be damned if he let Sirius see it. "You tired?" Remus asked. "Nah," Sirius said. "Slept all morning. Peter too." "Oh, good." Remus finally reached his bed and sat down. Without even thinking, his hand went to rub his hip. He stopped as soon as he realised, but Sirius's eyes zeroed in on it at once. He looked Remus in the eye reproachfully. "Did you speak to Madame Pomfrey?" "We had a lovely chat, thanks." Remus stiffened, defences back up. "All about her poor ex-students who had to transform for the first time last night. It was really cheery." Sirius tutted. "But did you talk to her about your hip?" "No," Remus huffed, lying down. "Remus, stop being difficult. You see her every week. Just mention to her. I'll do it if you want me to." "Jesus Christ, not this again. Leave me alone." Remus sat up. "No," Sirius retorted, just as viciously. "I don't understand why you won't tell her about it. I'm sure she could help." "Oh my God, why can't you just drop it? I said I don't want to bother her with a crap like this. You're making such a big fuss over nothing." Remus was on his feet now, the wolf inside him wanting the higher ground, asserting dominance. "And you're avoiding your problems again," Sirius raged. "You always do this, and it's bloody exhausting. You think you're being so mature, do you? Keeping everything bottled up. It's stupid. You're just making a martyr of yourself. It's like you want to be miserable." "Oh, get fucked, Black," Remus shouted back. "Easy for you to have a go, isn't it? Why do we always have to talk about my shit life, Mr. Tell Me Your Fucking Secret?" Sirius blinked, shocked, and Remus was elated. He had something now. He had Sirius in his jaw. He wasn't letting go until he tasted blood. "What about you, Sirius? How come we never talk about your fucked up family, with your Death-Eater brother and your insane cousin? Why don't we talk about your pain, and your scars for a little while? See how that feels." "Remus, for fuck's sake." "No, I know. Why don't we talk about your mother?" Remus went in for the kill, and it was more affected than he had even expected. Sirius changed completely. His expression froze, his posture tensed, as if he'd been punched in the gut. Remus almost wished he had punched him, because then at least Sirius could just punch him back, and they could have a fair fight, and that would be it. But that hadn't been fair, and he couldn't take it back. Sirius gave him a look of utter hurt and shock, before turning quickly to anger. "Go fuck yourself, Lupin," he spat, storming out. "Yeah, piss off then," Remus shouted as the door slammed. He was breathing hard, and his face was very hot. He wished Sirius would come back and shout at him a bit more so he could shout back, but he settled for chain-smoking and the Sex Pistols. Fuck everyone. Remus did not return, and Remus didn't know where the map was, so he couldn't look for him. Eventually, the dorm room did open again, and Lily and James came in, very close together and whispering happily. "Oh, hiya, Moony." James stopped as he caught sight of Remus brooding by the window. He looked a bit sheepish. "Sorry, we thought you'd be in the hospital wing still." "Nope, she lets me go to lunch, normally," Remus replied, monotone. He got up. "I'll get out of your way." No, Remus, don't," Lily said, flustered. "We just came up here for the quiet." "Really?" Remus raised a sarcastic eyebrow, and Lily and James blushed, looking away. "Where's Padfoot?" James went over to sit on his bed. "Don't know." "What?" "Don't know, don't care." Remus withdrew another cigarette from his matchbox and lit it with the end of the last one. "Are you having a fight?" "Look, stay out of it, Potter," Remus snarled. James recoiled and looked at Lily, who shrugged at him. At that very moment, as if it had been summoned just to break the tension, an owl flew into the open room, surprising all three of them. It was from the Potters, and James retrieved 2 letters that were tied to its leg. He glanced down to one, and held it out to Remus. "For you, Moony." Clicking his tongue irritably, Remus got up off the sill and went to snatch it from James's outstretched hand. He opened it, skimming the brief note from Mrs. Potter, who had been so kindly forwarding all of his correspondence. He expected another postcard from Grant, but it was a very neatly folded envelope. He didn't recognise the tidy blue ink handwriting. It had a Muggle stamp. He looked down at the return address, written in tiny script on the back. "If undelivered, please return to Miss Hope Jenkins, Sparrow Ward, Cardiff City Hospital, Cardiff." End of chapter 137.